I know right off the bat, if I'm going to sit down with somebody and say, hey, we're going to entertain like a serious conversation because we might actually try to date for real, right?
Yes.
I got to lay those cards on the table. I have to have thought about that already and reflected on that already to be able to verbalize that to you.
Yes.
And I need you to do the same. And we have to be in sync there. Because if we're not and we don't talk about it, what do you think is going to happen as time progresses and we've never discussed these very serious topics?
I agree. Oh my God. And so, okay, my next question I want to get into about toxic relationships is this idea of are they the same as abusive relationships? And so we know the typical abusive relationships, physically, verbally, emotionally. And so would you call those the same as toxic, or are they a little different?
I would say there's some overlap for sure. When people use these terms, so keeping in mind again, defining the terms. So toxic and abuse, those are both what I call umbrella terms. A lot of stuff sort of falls underneath the purview of that. And so even within abuse, right, there's different levels to it. And neglect and abuse are obviously two different things. So they're separate categories, both from a mental health standpoint, even from a legal standpoint. So when I think about abuse, I would first want to know, for example, if somebody was sitting down with me, what type of abuse are you saying that you experienced? Did you experience emotional abuse? Did you experience physical abuse? Was it sexual abuse? What did you go through? Just to get more context, because it helps me understand how to navigate that experience with that person. Like, just to give a slight example, if I have a young lady that's sitting down with me and she's been physically abused by her father, okay, I'm a man. I have to now remember that, because I could at some point end up triggering her into remembering those experiences with her father.
Yes,
I could become the avatar of her father, not because I did anything,
wow.
but simply because I'm a man.
Wow.
So I have to be conscious of that with her in that particular case. Now, that not to say that couldn't happen to a man too. There's plenty of young boys who've been physically abused or assaulted by
Sure.
their fathers or male partners or female partners and mothers. And so it's just little things that we have to think about when you're trying to engage with somebody. So abuse, there has to be a little more clarity. What type of abuse are you speaking to? And as we talked about with toxicity or toxic relationships, what are those traits or those characteristics about that person that makes them toxic?
Exactly. Oh man, amazing. And so I guess even speaking from my own experience, looking back, I remember one relationship I was in, and I was going back over some old emails we were writing and to each other back and forth. And I would say, I mean, just looking back at them, they were verbally abusive, right? And I read them and I felt embarrassed. I mean, this was like the most, as I call it, the most poetic, vile, vindictive crap I had ever wrote about two people who claimed they love each other. And so, looking back, I was like, wow, that was really abusive. And it seemed like we thrived off of it, right? And we needed it, and sometimes we would even laugh about it. It was very toxic, right? And so I'm throwing those things out there, and so I guess just asking you, what was that? I mean, I guess I was just like, oh man, this is bad.
No, I mean, that's a great example, and I appreciate you sharing or being willing to share that. A lot of us go through these types of experiences, and it's hard for us to deconstruct why we chose to engage in it. So let me try to give you like a personal example, and hopefully we can like go a little deeper into what you said, because this is something that I had to process in my own life. So hopefully it'll be relevant. One thing I had to learn very early on in my life, especially when I first started going through therapy as an adult, because I've gone throughout my life. I grew up in a very physically abusive household. My father used to beat me and my older sister a lot. Black man, very common in the Black community for most brothers and sisters I know. Yes. Corporal punishment is pretty common, but my dad was very much, he took it to the extreme.
The next level.
Yeah. And so because of that, I didn't recognize in my first significant relationship, coming out of high school, going into college, it was significant. It was 4.5 years. I was with somebody who was very reminiscent of my father in terms of, at times, the way she talked to me, the way that she would get physical with me at times. And it brought out sides of me, of course, that I didn't like either, because I felt like I needed to defend myself. And it just generally was not a healthy environment for us to be in.
Yeah.
But what I came to realize as I got older, how did that even happen? Because in my life, growing up with my father, I learned to equate abuse with love,
Wow.
because my father would only tell me he loved me after he beat me really bad.
Wow.
And so it was at that point that I realized, oh, I thought those two kind of go together. So if this woman loves me, it's kind of okay that we get into these physical altercations.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
kind of normalized, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what my father did. And I
That's
had
what you were
nothing but
used
respect for him. So back to you. How could we maybe get into these situations where we're having these vile discussions, as you've said, via email? Well, depending on how he grew up and how you grew up, that might play a significant role as to why that was even a part of your relationship. The fact that you would even verbalize those words, even in written format, to your partner, if, like you said, if there's a lot of love there, why would I ever think that that is appropriate?
Yes.
This would be the question.
Yes.
Why would I ever think that that is appropriate to speak to this person that I say that I love, that I'm choosing to be with, in that way? Is that even respectful?
No.
Right.
And that's kind of where my thoughts went with that situation. Definitely, just even listening to your story and being able to relate. I grew up in a house with a lot of verbal abuse, and like I would say, I'm comfortable in that chaos, right? And so
Mhm.
definitely, it was a learned behavior, a learned trait.
Mhm.
RJ, you you breaking this down for me?
I mean,
You
but
breaking-
it's true though. I mean, it happens. I think for a lot of us, and this is why I'm grateful to do what I do, because I had to go through a lot of that hurt and that pain to try to understand why I was in these situations, why I saw the world the way that I did, why I thought that these things were okay, even when they were not.
Yes,
So that was my whole point about why I think therapy can benefit so many people.
yes,
It's not even that you have to be in crisis, as you said earlier. You can come just to get a check-in, but sometimes what you might realize is there might have been things brewing under the surface that your partner has been pushing off, you've been pushing off, both of you have been pushing off, and it may have to do with your normal way of behaving around them. Normal, I put in quotation marks, because everybody's normal is not the same.
yes,
And her normal might be different. So we might need to understand that when we're first setting up this intention to be together, what is the expectations of how we should feel treated by each other? And maybe it's me understanding, hey, if I know I came from a hostile environment, speaking for myself, I value safety, security, respect, compassion, ability to be vulnerable with that person. Communication is very important to me.
yes,
And so I know right off the bat, if I'm going to sit down with somebody and say, hey, we're going to entertain like a serious conversation, because we might actually try to date for real, right?
yes,
I got to lay those cards on the table. I have to have thought about that already and reflected on that already to be able to verbalize that to you.
yes.
And I need you to do the same. And we have to be in sync there. Because if we're not and we don't talk about it, what do you think is going to happen as time progresses and we've never discussed these very serious topics?
It's gonna be a wide gap, okay?
We
I
could
was
just end up drifting,
yeah, keep drifting. It gets worse and worse.